They called him the hero of Kepler Station until the day he wasn't. The records show Admiral Marcus Thorne saved 14 colonies from the Vex invasion, earned the Cross of Valor twice, and commanded the respect of every officer in the Terran Defense Fleet. But records don't show everything. They don't show the nightmares, the voices in his head, or what he found in the depths of Kepler Station during those final desperate hours when the Vex were breaking through the shields and humanity's last hope hung by a thread. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Monsters rarely announce themselves with fanfare. They creep in through cracks in your certainty, through moments when doing the right thing feels impossible and wrong feels necessary. Admiral Thorne learned this lesson in the worst way possible when he discovered that sometimes saving everyone means becoming something everyone should fear. It started 3 years after Kepler, when Thorne was reassigned to Deep Space Patrol aboard the dreadnought Nemesis. Far from the core worlds, far from the media, far from anyone who might ask too many questions about the changes in his behavior. His crew noticed first, the way he stared too long at tactical displays, the way his hands trembled during briefings. Not from fear, but from something else. Something hungry. Commander Sarah Chen, his first officer, had served with Thorne for 6 years. She knew his patterns, his moods, his tells better than anyone. So when he started spending 18-hour shifts in his private quarters, accessing classified files from the Kepler incident, she knew something was wrong. But wrong didn't begin to cover what she discovered when she finally worked up the courage to investigate. The first sign was the requisition orders, medical supplies in quantities that made no sense for a standard patrol mission. Neural suppressants, memory enhancement drugs, experimental combat stimulants. The kind of chemicals that were banned after the Geneva Protocols of 2387. When Chen confronted him about it, Thorne's response chilled her to the bone. "The Vex aren't gone, Sarah," he said without looking up from his console. "They're regrouping, adapting, evolving. And when they come back, we need to be ready to match them. Evolution for evolution." Chen stared at him. The man who had once lectured young officers about honor and duty now spoke about evolution like it was a weapon to be wielded. "Marcus, what did you really find at Kepler Station?" Thorne finally looked at her, and Chen saw something behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. A darkness that seemed to move independently of his thoughts. "I found the future, Sarah. And it's not human." The truth about Kepler Station had been classified at the highest levels, buried under layers of bureaucracy and national security protocols. But Thorne had been there. He had seen what the Vex were really doing to their prisoners. Not killing them, not enslaving them. Transforming them into something new. Something that could think like humans but fight like Vex. Something that could infiltrate human colonies and destroy them from within. The official report stated that Admiral Thorne had destroyed the Vex facility and rescued the survivors. But there were no survivors. Not really. What came back from Kepler Station wore human faces, spoke human languages, remembered human lives. But they weren't human anymore. And Thorne had let them integrate back into society because he thought he could study them, learn from them, use their knowledge to prepare for the next invasion. He was wrong. The integration subjects, as he called them in his private logs, began to malfunction after 18 months. Some became violent. Others simply stopped functioning. But a few, a precious few, began to show signs of something unprecedented. They retained their human emotions, their human creativity, while gaining Vex tactical superiority and regenerative capabilities. Thorne became obsessed with the implications. If humans could be transformed voluntarily, if the process could be refined, controlled, then humanity wouldn't need to fear the Vex. They could become the Vex. Or something better. Something that combined the best of both species. The first volunteer was Lieutenant James Morrison, a young officer who had lost his entire family in the Vex raids. Morrison was eager, desperate, willing to try anything if it meant preventing other families from suffering the same fate. Thorne assured him the procedure was safe, that the risks were minimal, that he would be contributing to humanity's survival. Morrison survived the initial transformation. The neural integration was successful. The physical modifications took hold. Within weeks, he was stronger, faster, more resilient than any human had a right to be. His tactical analysis improved by 300%. His reaction time dropped to inhuman levels. But something else changed too. Something Thorne hadn't anticipated. Morrison began to see humans differently. Not as his species, not as his people, but as something primitive, inefficient, flawed. He still cared about them, the way a scientist might care about an interesting specimen. But the emotional connection, the instinctive kinship that defined humanity, had been severed. Replaced by cold, analytical assessment. "They're so slow," Morrison reported during one of his evaluations. "Their thoughts, their movements, their understanding of tactical situations. It's like watching children play at war." Thorne noted everything, documented every change, every enhancement, every loss. Morrison was just the beginning, the prototype for something larger. Thorne had requisitioned an entire research facility in the Outer Rim, away from prying eyes, away from oversight, where he could perfect the process and create an army of enhanced humans who could match the Vex when they returned. Commander Chen discovered the facility by accident during a routine supply run. She had been tracking anomalous resource allocations, trying to understand why Thorne was burning through medical supplies at an unprecedented rate. What she found in the abandoned mining station at Proxima 7 made her question everything she thought she knew about the man she had served under for 6 years. The facility was a maze of laboratories, operating theaters, and containment cells. Filled with volunteers from across the fleet. Officers who had requested transfers to serve under the legendary Admiral Thorne, never knowing they were volunteering for something far more permanent. Most of the subjects were in various stages of transformation, some barely recognizable as the humans they had once been. But it was the central laboratory that truly horrified Chen. There, in a suspension tank, floated something that might once have been human but was now a grotesque fusion of flesh and technology. Multiple limbs, sensor arrays instead of eyes, and a nervous system that pulsed with artificial light. This was Thorne's masterpiece, his attempt to create the perfect fusion of human and Vex capabilities. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Thorne's voice came from behind Chen, who spun around to find the Admiral watching her with eyes that reflected the same artificial light as his creation. Subject 0. The first successful integration of human consciousness with Vex biotechnology. She retains all her memories, her personality, her emotional responses. But enhanced. Amplified. Perfected. Chen backed away from the tank, her hand moving instinctively toward her sidearm. "Marcus, what have you done? These people trusted you. They volunteered to serve under you, not to become your experiments." Thorne smiled, but there was no warmth in it. No humanity. "They volunteered to save humanity, Sarah. And that's exactly what they're doing. When the Vex return, and they will return, we'll be ready. Not as victims, not as prey, but as predators." "You've become one of them," Chen whispered. "You've become a monster." "I've become what humanity needs," Thorne replied. "Evolution doesn't ask permission, Sarah. It doesn't wait for committee approval. It adapts or it dies. And I refuse to let humanity die." The confrontation that followed would be classified for decades afterward. Officially, Commander Chen was killed in an accident during a routine inspection mission. But the truth was far more disturbing. Chen tried to shut down the facility, tried to free the surviving volunteers, tried to send a distress signal to Fleet Command. Thorne stopped her. Not with violence, not with threats, but with science. He had been dosing the ship's water supply with low-level neural modifiers for months, gradually adjusting his crew's brain chemistry. Making them more susceptible to suggestion, more loyal to his vision, more willing to accept what they might otherwise have questioned. Chen found herself unable to pull the trigger, unable to complete her sabotage, unable to resist when Thorne offered her a choice: join the program voluntarily, or be added to it involuntarily. She chose a third option, destroying the facility's main reactor and taking herself and half the research staff with her in the explosion. The blast was visible from 3 star systems away. But Thorne survived, along with Subject 0 and 17 other successful transformations. They escaped in a modified transport while the Nemesis and its crew were consumed in the Inferno. Officially, Admiral Marcus Thorne died a hero's death, trying to save his crew from a catastrophic reactor failure. But heroes don't stay dead, especially when they've transcended the limitations of human mortality. Thorne had undergone his own transformation during the months of experimentation. Not as dramatic as Subject Zero's, but enough to ensure his survival. Enough to enhance his already formidable strategic mind. Enough to make him something more and less than human. The Enhanced, as they called themselves, established a new base of operations in the dark nebula beyond the Outer Rim. Where sensor sweeps couldn't penetrate and fleet patrols never ventured. There they continued Thorne's work, refining the transformation process, recruiting new volunteers from the desperate and the disillusioned. Word spread through underground networks on frontier worlds and military bases. Stories of a place where humans could become something more. Where the weak could become strong. Where the victims of Vex raids could gain the power to fight back on equal terms. The stories attracted exactly the kind of people Thorne needed: broken soldiers, traumatized civilians, anyone with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Within 2 years, the Enhanced numbered in the hundreds. Each one a fusion of human ingenuity and Vex capabilities. They could think like humans but fight like machines. Strategize like generals but strike like assassins. They were everything Thorne had promised they would be, and everything humanity should have feared. The first sign of their return came during a routine patrol in the Centauri sector. A Vex scouting force had been detected approaching a small mining colony. The local defense force was hopelessly outmatched, but before fleet reinforcements could arrive, the Vex ship simply disappeared. No debris, no energy signatures, no explanation. Just empty space where a dozen enemy vessels had been moments before. The colony's sensor logs showed something impossible. The Vex ships had been destroyed by weapons that read as human technology but operated at efficiency levels that exceeded human capabilities. The attacking force had appeared, vanished, and struck with precision that bordered on prescience. Leaving no survivors among the Vex and no trace of their own presence. Similar incidents began occurring across the frontier. Vex raiding parties would attack remote settlements, only to be eliminated by unknown forces using unidentifiable tactics. The attacks were too coordinated to be random, too sophisticated to be militia, too clean to be military. But Fleet Command dismissed them as equipment malfunctions or sensor ghosts. Admiral Helena Cross, who had replaced Thorne as sector commander after his supposed death, began to suspect something more was happening. The pattern of interventions, the surgical precision of the strikes, the complete absence of witnesses. All pointed to a highly organized force operating outside official channels. Her investigation led her to classified files about Kepler Station. Files that had been sealed after Thorne's death. Files that painted a very different picture of humanity's greatest hero. The more she learned, the more she realized that Marcus Thorne hadn't died in that reactor explosion. He had simply shed his last connection to humanity. The truth emerged during the Battle of Titan's Gate, when a massive Vex invasion force broke through the outer perimeter defenses and threatened to overrun the entire Proxima system. Fleet Command threw everything they had at the enemy: massive dreadnoughts, carrier groups, planetary defense platforms. But the Vex adapted to every tactic, absorbed every strategy, turned humanity's own weapons against them. Just when defeat seemed inevitable, when the evacuation orders were being prepared, when Admiral Cross was about to order a full retreat, the Enhanced revealed themselves. Ships that looked human but moved like liquid metal. Weapons that hummed with alien energy. Tactics that combined human unpredictability with Vex precision. Leading them was Admiral Marcus Thorne. Or what Marcus Thorne had become. His body was still recognizably human, but enhanced, augmented with technology that pulsed beneath his skin. His eyes reflected the same artificial light as his creations. His voice carried harmonics that registered on multiple frequencies. Admiral Cross, his transmission crackled across all channels. I believe you've been looking for me. The battle that followed redefined everything humanity thought it knew about warfare. The Enhanced didn't just fight the Vex, they dominated them. Using the enemy's own biological advantages against them. Turning their adaptive capabilities into weaknesses. Their collective consciousness into a vulnerability. Their perfect coordination into predictable patterns. But it was the aftermath that truly shook Admiral Cross. When the Vex fleet lay in ruins, when the threat to Proxima had been eliminated, Thorne's ships didn't withdraw, didn't disappear. They took position around the human vessels like predators surrounding prey. The Vex will return, Thorne announced. They always return. But next time, humanity will be ready. Whether humanity wants to be or not. Cross found herself staring at tactical displays that showed her fleet completely surrounded by ships that registered as human but moved with inhuman precision. Marcus, you've saved us. But at what cost? What have you become? I've become what you needed me to become, Helena. What humanity needed me to become. Evolution doesn't ask permission. It simply is. The standoff lasted for 3 hours. Cross refused to surrender her fleet. Thorne refused to withdraw his enhanced forces. The rest of the galaxy watched as two human commanders faced each other across the void. One representing what humanity was, the other representing what it might become. In the end, it was the Enhanced who withdrew. But not out of mercy, not out of respect for their former humanity, but because Thorne had made his point. Humanity could be saved, but only if it accepted transformation. Only if it embraced what it must become to survive. The official report classified the Enhanced as rogue elements led by a mentally unstable former admiral. But Admiral Cross knew better. She had seen the efficiency of their tactics, the precision of their coordination, the cold calculation in their enhanced eyes. Thorne had succeeded in creating the perfect fusion of human and Vex capabilities. But in doing so, he had created something that was no longer fully either. He had become the monster he once fought against, the very thing he had sworn to protect humanity from. Months later, as Cross reviewed intelligence reports about enhanced recruitment activities in the outer sectors, she realized the terrible truth. Thorne hadn't fallen to madness or megalomania. He had made a rational, calculated decision to sacrifice his humanity for the greater good of the species. But the question that haunted her in the dark hours of deep space patrol was whether he was right. Whether humanity's survival really did require such a sacrifice. Whether the price of victory against the Vex was becoming something even worse. The Enhanced continued their operations in the shadows, recruiting the desperate, transforming the willing, preparing for the next Vex invasion. And Admiral Marcus Thorne, once humanity's greatest hero, had become its most necessary monster. The galaxy would remember him as both savior and destroyer. As the man who had saved humanity by ensuring it could never again be fully human. As the hero who had become a monster not through corruption or evil, but through the terrible logic of survival at any cost. In the end, history would struggle to judge whether Admiral Thorne had saved humanity or doomed it. Whether his transformation had been an act of ultimate sacrifice or ultimate betrayal. Whether the Enhanced were humanity's salvation or its replacement. But in the dark between the stars, where the Enhanced waited and watched and prepared, Marcus Thorne no longer cared about such distinctions. He had made his choice, accepted his transformation, embraced his role as humanity's guardian monster. And when the Vex returned, as they inevitably would, they would find not the primitive, emotional species they had once hunted, but something new. Something that combined human creativity with alien precision. Something that had learned to fight monsters by becoming one. The hero of Kepler Station was dead. Long live the monster of Proxima 7. The savior who had damned himself to save everyone else. The admiral who had discovered that sometimes the greatest act of heroism is accepting that you can never be a hero again.